I'm sorry guys, but we just have to talk about large language models for a second. They are so incredibly valuable that we still haven't seen the true blossoming of what has already been made. And even some recent advancements have proven this. We're going to peel back the curtain on all of this today, and hopefully this will be a sneak peek at the next generation of large language models to some degree. Lots of really awesome stuff. First of all, I just want to get you all up to speed on what is considered to be the best gold standard large language model at the moment. And of course, this can change week by week. That's how crazy fast AI development is. But right now it's Claude 3 Opus. It's this large language model that is more or less better in every benchmark than any other model out there right now, including GPT-4, which is still a great model. And Gemini's not too bad in some areas as well, but Claude 3 Opus is the best. Now, Claude 3 also comes in some smaller sizes like Haiku or Sonnet that aren't as good, but they run a lot faster and cheaper than Claude 3 Opus. And of course, they run a lot faster and cheaper than GPT-4, 3.5, Gemini, etc. But guys, here's the twist in this story. Claude 3 Haiku, which is, again, that smaller, not as capable model, can be tricked into actually becoming nearly as good as the top-performing model, Claude 3 Opus. How does this work? Well, again, this actually comes from the point that large language models have a ton of untapped potential, even the ones that we already have access to. It's all about how you prompt the model, how you extract that capability out. It's the beauty of technology like this. What you see necessarily isn't what you can get. Matt Schumer on Twitter introduces Claude Opus to Haiku. You can get the quality of Claude 3 Opus at a fraction of the cost and latency. Give one example of your task, and Claude 3 Opus will teach Haiku 60 times cheaper how to do the task perfectly. And of course, it's all entirely open source by Matt Schumer. Matt Schumer, for those of you who don't know, is the CEO of Hyperwrite AI. They have one of the better AI-based assistants that's currently out there, and this open source repository was inspired by his tweet that went viral that I immediately retweeted once I saw it because I didn't believe it at first, but Matt Schumer is no slouch when it comes to getting the most out of a large language model. Here's his original tweet. Highest alpha secret in AI right now. If you provide, let's say 10 examples to a lower end large language model, Haiku, Claude 3 Haiku, then it'll often outperform Claude 3 Opus and far outperform GPT-4 a fraction of the cost. Just because you're giving it examples of how it should work. You're prompting it. You're pre-prompting the model. The background architecture is entirely the same. You're just figuring out a way to extract more out of what's already there. Anyways, the whole goal of this open source notebook here is so that anyone can implement it into their different AI projects very quickly. He explains how it works. You give Opus a description of your task. Again, this is the bigger model. We're starting out with the bigger model, along with one input and output example, and that's it. Opus will then go out and generate, based on his repo, other great diverse examples that are similar in structure to your one example. Then it will use those, plus the task description, to generate a system prompt that can then be input into Haiku, or any smaller large language model really, but it works great with Haiku according to Matt. Lastly, it saves both the system prompt and the examples in a Python file pre-formatted for generation. So again, this is really more focused towards people who are developing AI tools, because a huge problem when you're developing an AI tool is that you want to have very high quality models. Let's do a very simple example. Let's say you're making an AI website that makes stories. Obviously, you're not going to make a large language model yourself. You're going to go use a really good one like Claude 3 Opus or GPT-4 Turbo. Those APIs, to import them in your website, they are quite expensive for both you and your end user, who eventually has to pay for a plan every month. If you can use Matt Schumer's example here, Claude Opus to Haiku, you can effectively get the same quality as those higher end models for a much cheaper and faster price, by the way. It generates a lot faster. How massive is that? It benefits people on all scales, and I'm really glad that he open sourced this little number, because that means like anyone who's building something can just input it directly into their product. It's such a mind blow. Bernardo here is coining this in context distillation, and I think that's a pretty good term. And again, the mind blowing part about this and why this is possible in the first place, because it seems like it shouldn't be, right? You have a bigger model, it does better things, but we just need that bigger model once to then teach the smaller models how to act. The value is so entrenched and so deep in these models that a lot of the difficulty for us is not necessarily building a better model to do a better task. It's actually just how do we pull the value out in the first place? You can think of the large language model almost like this massive ocean, and every piece of the bottom of that ocean has value to it, but it's not necessarily the specific value that you need for whatever task you're trying to do, like writing stories or coding, for example. By using this Claude 3 Opus to Haiku, you're able to actually get a little X on your map for where the treasure chest is at the bottom of the ocean for your specific task. Just absolutely magical and mind-blowing. This is a part of the reason that LLMs made my jaw absolutely dropped when I first started using them. It is like infinite knowledge in there. You couldn't consume it all if you tried. Huge props to Matt Schumer for open sourcing stuff like this, and he has other things too that we're going to talk about in this video, but this is absolutely huge and definitely is flying under the radar right now. Oh, also a really good point by Technium here. What do you do if you do this to Opus though? Matt Schumer simply responds, big models, big examples, big success, expensive. Now the point really here is that we need a better model than Opus to get Opus to essentially work at that next gen level. Like, it is very possible that inside the best model, Claude 3 Opus or GPT-4, the GPT-5 equivalent or Claude 4 equivalent already kind of exists in its capabilities, but it just doesn't know how to bring them out because we need those big models to exist first to then teach those models, again, how to act. Such a weird concept. This right here operates in a very similar vein. This is called Quietstar. Post is by Bindu Reddy on Twitter. It gives the large language model an inner monologue, which essentially forces them to more or less think before they speak. It improves common sense and reasoning, but doubles the math performance, shockingly. Bindu points out this is not exactly like OpenAI's Quietstar, which honestly I never dived too deep into because it's nothing that we ever saw. The most important part about Quietstar, though, is that it's fully open source. Again, anyone can access this for completely free. Anyone can implement this. Bindu is pretty sure that OpenAI's Quietstar and GPT-5 use techniques like this one to improve reasoning in large language models dramatically, giving them this inner monologue. Humans usually pause to think before writing or speaking. Similarly, with Quietstar, LLMs learn to generate rationales at each token to explain the future text, improving their predictions over time. And yeah, also guys, I want you to think about this too. As we look into this new Quietstar, this inner monologue that improves the capability of AIs, think about also compounding this inner monologue with what we just talked about, the Haiku Opus technique. We'll have it think before it speaks, and we'll also give it examples of how it should speak in the first place. Could we quadruple our capabilities here in the large language model? Could we use Quietstar to make a small model like Haiku even better than Claude 3 Opus? Could you take a tiny model and make it nearly as good as a GPT-5 that's not even released yet? It's just crazy again. The amount of capabilities that you can have that already exist. It's already capable. We're just learning how to pull them out. So diving a little bit deeper into the weeds of how this genuinely works under the hood, the idea behind it is to generate many inner rationales and monologues in parallel after every token is generated in the AI. And a token you can think of as like a word or maybe a few letters, something like that. So at every step of the way, at every step of generation, it's thinking and rationalizing. You mix future text predictions with and without rationales, which is talking, and then you actually take all of this and learn based on a reward mechanism. The reward mechanism teaches the large language model to learn the right rationales versus the bad rationales. It's crazy too because this improved a 7B model. By the way, guys, a 7B model, much smaller than something like GPT 3.5 even, or GPT-4, or Claude Haiku, or Claude Opus. Small model. Took it from 36% on common sense question and answer to 47%. So that's over 10% increase just by adding an inner monologue to the model. And the math performance is doubled, which is just, again, absolutely mind-blowing. The implications here could be even larger. It's not been tested on a big model like GPT-4 because it's closed source. So the effects of this Quietstar might actually be much more powerful when they're applied to Claude 3 or a GPT-4 when trained from scratch. It's open source. It's a little bit more difficult to implement. It's more for the developers of the large language models themselves, but that doesn't mean it can't be compounded with what we just talked about earlier. It's mind-blowing how much value is in these trained models. And there are some really good points in the comments here. I want to point them out. Joshua Sarragan points out that it's increasingly clear this inner monologue style, planning and reasoning is one of the key missing pieces in the quest for AGI or artificial general intelligence. And, he agrees that this is a breakthrough technique. Someone also points out how much more expensive is this to run, though, and that's a really good point. It does cost a little bit more to run something like this, but as I just spoke about in my last video, we are seeing developments on the hardware side of things too. Developments on the hardware side of things that make things, 1/4 the cost or more to actually generate and train these models. Here is a pretty crazy statement that I need to hear your thoughts on in the comments. So if you're watching right now, please leave a comment. What do you think about this? Someone says, Quietstar equals the beginnings of consciousness inside of these AI models. I don't know about that. I mean, is it just simulating thinking? Is that what we're doing? Are we really conscious? What is consciousness in the first place? Lots of big questions to ask here when we're developing these AI models. If we can have a large language model more or less think with something like Quietstar, but yet it still can't feel any kind of pain, it can't feel any kind of suffering, because it's just simulating thinking, it doesn't actually have a physical body. Does that mean the only thing that makes us human is the fact that we can actually feel pain? Interesting philosophical thoughts, for sure. Let me know what you think about it. I really want to hear your thoughts. Here is yet another example of this. Again, this is sort of like that Quietstar we just looked at. However, it's implemented not on the training side of things. It's implemented after the model has already been created. So you can do it to ChatGPT, you can do it to Claude 3 right now. And again, imagine combining this with some of the other techniques that we saw beforehand. 3 layers of compounding. This is just simple chain of thought. Ruben does a wonderful job of explaining it in this Twitter thread, so let's go through it. First, what is chain of thought? It's a prompt technique that forces the large language model to think before giving a good answer. Again, this is not on the token side of things directly, though, like we just saw with Quietstar, although it is very similar. Start by creating a step-by-step reasoning process. Breaking down a problem into bite-sized steps is easier for both humans and large language models. Because this is a direct prompt technique, you can see the comparison between the prompts in his example with GPT-4. This example is an article for solopreneurs. This task requires strategy, reasoning, and an action plan. So on the left-hand side, we have a very simple prompt, which is just, I want to write an article for solopreneurs, help me write a bullet point list. The reasoning prompt is, I want to write an article for solopreneurs, help me with a bullet point list. Step 1, browse my website here. Step 2, brainstorm one topic and stick to this topic only. Step 3, list key specific action items to cover this one topic only. Be as precise and narrow as possible. Step 4, write the full bullet point. The first generation, as noted here, is a little bit too vague. It covers too many topics. Just kind of like a nice looking basic homework. But the step-by-step on the right does a much better job at producing results here. Covers the one topic as prompted, goes much deeper, and it's no longer this generic sounding AI answer, which is something that we're starting to see really pop up with a lot of lazy prompting, as I like to call it. So the conclusion here by Ruben Hasid is, don't be shy, make your prompts a little bit more detailed, prefer chain of thought to simple chat, and test and iterate as needed. What I would be willing to say is, how can we take this one step further? Let's say we have chain of thought implemented on a deep level with Quietstar, which is probably the biggest piece that we're talking about in this video. We'll start with that. We'll train our small, fast model, improves things pretty dramatically right off the bat, double the math, 10% better in overall reasoning. Then every time we prompt this thing, we're going to do this. We're going to take examples from a larger, better model and teach it how to perform based off of these examples inside of the prompt, like our first example today. And every time you prompt the large language model, we'll actually make sure that your prompt first goes to a separate model that takes your prompt and turns it into a chain of thought prompt, basically a conversion. So you can still lazy prompt it, but it gets converted to chain of thought. Then you send that over with the pre-prompt from the larger model to get a final good result that all gets generated fairly quickly at a cheap cost. That's the kind of future that I see. We already have this capability right in front of us. It just needs to be implemented. And again, this is all based off of really small models, small little open source models, and you can have something that is like probably pretty damn good. Before our final note, I have yet another thing from Matt Schumer. This is the Claude Investor. This is the first Claude 3 investment analysis agent. All you have to do is provide an industry and it will find financial data and news, analyze sentiment and trends for each, and rank stocks by investment potential plus price targets. It's a constrained agent, meaning its behavior is highly controlled, leading to better results than open-ended agents. It chains together lots of Claude 3 calls that work together to analyze the major stocks in a given category. Got a nice legal note saying it's not financial advice or a substitute for a professional. Don't use it for real stock picking, although, someone's going to, probably. The quality of the output is amazing, and Claude provides its reasoning for every decision. This is also completely open source as well. Matt Schumer has just been killing it lately with these little, large language model-based open source enhancements. Someone asks about the cost to run this, says it's not too expensive because, he's using that technique that uses Haiku to do most of the calls, but in terms of overall tokens, it's quite the monster. This guy apparently is up 500% doing this manually with Claude. Oh my god. Again, leading me back. Extracting value out of what we already have. I want to end off with this. Again, this is also from Matt Schumer. He built an even wilder Claude agent than the last two that he open sourced, and he might open source it tomorrow. This guy is just on a roll with Claude 3, really getting utilization out of this thing. But agent's a little bit different than what we saw earlier. Agent means that this thing can go do tasks on its own. It can go grab stuff for you. It can more or less use your web browser. That's what Hyperwrite Assistant is, and I assume that's what he's talking about. He gives a warning that it's a token-eating monstrosity so far, so it might have very good capabilities, but it also might be very expensive to run. And I just love the comment here. I never imagined AGI would emerge from Haiku and millions of tokens of context. Well, this probably isn't actual AGI. It's pretty funny to think about. We never imagined that we'd actually probably be able to get to something maybe a little bit better than Claude 3, better than GPT-4, close to GPT-5 potentially, which isn't released yet, of course, by using all of these different techniques to just draw value out of what we already have access to. It's incredible, and this is one of the reasons I think open source is just going to kick butt, is because for as much as we talk about, big GPUs and big giant models, big giant GPT-5, Claude 3 Opus, once those models are already created, the value can be extracted out of them. It's very clear that, yes, the value of those models does lie within inside of the model itself, the weights itself, which are closed source, locked behind doors, in OpenAI and Anthropic, but they're giving us access in a way to those models through their API, and we can simply use examples to make models better. That's how it is, and of course, we're having large, probably GPT-4 scale models like Llama 3, for example, open sourcing soon anyways. I still am pretty convinced that open source is the future. Thanks for joining me today. Check out my Discord server, because a lot of the stuff that I discover in my videos comes from that Discord server. It's an amazing community, and if you really want to stay on the pulse of AI, I would recommend going there. Also, sometimes we have, giveaways. You can pop in and say hi to me. I'm on there quite frequently. Just a great community overall. And follow me on Twitter as well. I always repost all of the latest news. See you in the next one.